Okay, so this is the start of our process here. This is our mash tun. So this is where we put all of our, essentially our ingredients, our corn, our rye, our oat, whatever we're using. And what we're going to do is we're going to cook that. And what we're doing when we're cooking this is we're taking all the grain that's in that starch, we're exposing it, and we're doing that via heat and via the grain being milled. And we expose starch because what we're going to do to this cook is we're going to add a couple of enzymes, and those enzymes are actually going to take that starch and they're going to convert it over to sugar. Sugar makes alcohol. So we do that in this process here. So we call this our mash tun, and our consistency in here is like almost a little bit, little more watery than oatmeal. You know, it's all corn and rye. You know, the color is a yellowish color. And we do anywhere from 1,500 liter to 2,000 liter volume runs. From a yield standpoint, depending on fermentation, we'll get about 10% of that in alcohol. So for easy numbers, if I have 2,000 liters of a cooked mash and I ferment that out, industry standard, I should get about 200 liters of a usable alcohol. That'll be a high proof alcohol after distillation, but that's about the yield in this industry. So this is the mash tun, and what we do is we make a mash in this. This process here will take us anywhere from 5, 6 to 7 hours, depending on mash size. And then we go over to the tanks behind us. These are fermenters. And what we're going to do after the cook, we have a very sweet, sticky mash. We've made a lot of sugar just via that conversion with the enzyme from starch to sugar. And we're going to pump that now sugary mash. We're going to pump it into a fermenter. And on the very first day, we're going to pitch a yeast. So we use very, very different yeast strains in the beer and wine industry. In this distillery, we use what we call a turbo yeast, or I call it a yeast on steroids. So very efficient, very strong, but also very susceptible to fermentation environment. But what that yeast is going to do over the next 7 to 9 days is that yeast is going to gobble up all the sugar that we created in the mash tun. And the byproduct from that is CO2, and it's also alcohol. So that CO2 is just going to carry off in vapor form, but the alcohol is going to stay in the mash. So about 7 to 9 days later, I've fermented this mash out. If you were to taste it then, it would become very sour, very pungent. You can actually taste the alcohol in the mash. And in this distillery, we set in anywhere from 13 to 15% alcohol after fermentation. So from here, we then go down to our still. So we're going to take that now fermented mash. Again, we're set about 13 to 15% alcohol. We're going to pump it into our pot still, and we're going to cook it again. So what we're doing this time is we're cooking off all the alcohol that we created in liquid form. We're going to take that to its flash point, and we're going to essentially boil it, and we're going to turn it into a vapor, and then we're going to process it, or what I would call polish it, through one of these distillation columns here. So depending on what we're making, you know, if we're making whiskey, which would be our corn and rye moonshine mash, if we're making vodka, or even if we're making gin. So we don't always use these columns all at the same time. We do, however, use that very end column, that is our condenser. Whenever the still's running, that is on. So we're going to pretend that we're using, or that we're making our corn and rye moonshine. What that means to us is after distillation, that sits in a barrel, and that's going to sit in a barrel for 3 years, and that's going to become Canadian whiskey. So when I'm making that, I run it through a 4-plate column. So what happens is I pump my mash in here, I seal the still down, I turn our steam on, I get that still nice and hot. I take that alcohol that's in liquid form to its flash point. We then boil it off essentially. It's then going to travel up. It travels up that copper onion. It then travels all the way across. We bypass our vodka columns and our gin column, but we run it through our whiskey column. So those vapors travel up, they travel across, they travel down this line here, They then travel up this column, and inside here are what they call distillation chambers. And this is where we polish and refine alcohol. So this is where we clean it, we take the impurities out, and this is where we raise the proof of the alcohol. And we do that just via distillation, which essentially is turning a vapor into a liquid and then turning it back into a vapor again. So when you do that to alcohol, you clean it, you remove impurities, you leave behind low percent alcohols, we call them low wines, but the high wines continue through the process. So by the time we distill that out 4 times, via the 4 distillation chambers, we then run it all the way down to the condenser. The inside of the condenser will be ice cold. We run cold water through that constantly when the still is on. And when that vapor hits that temperature, that cold temperature, it turns it back into a liquid for a final time. And we will have moonshine that comes off the end of the still. And it's going to come off anywhere between 80 and 85% alcohol.
Today we're at Dixon's Distillery in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And this distillery has been open to the public for 3 years and has been operating a little bit longer than that. And today I'd like to introduce you to Chevy. Chevy is the master distiller here. Excellent. And we'll run through some of the product lines and some of the background story of Dixon's Distillery. So what have we got here?
So this is us essentially. We have there's a few more products, and I'll pull them in here in a sec. But I'll start down here. So this is oat moonshine. So it's something that we kind of played around with. We decided to go out and buy a ton of oat and mash it in and ferment it out just to see what it was going to taste like. Turned out it was pretty damn good. Most moonshines that you can buy, and we actually used to sell ours here, it would be corn and rye based.
Yes.
That moonshine's going to go into a barrel, it's going to sit for 3 years, become Canadian whiskey. And we still make a ton of that moonshine, but we focus all of that shine into barrels. We're always trying to, when you're making Canadian whiskey, you got to forecast 3 years, 6 years, 9 years. So it's a tough thing to do. So we decided we didn't want to not have a moonshine on the counter. It's still pretty neat to Ontario. It's a very new industry. People still come in today and they can watch moonshine being run off the still. They find that the coolest thing in the world.
Well, it's also one of the fastest growing section of the industry too.
It's coming. Yeah, it's definitely coming. It'll be a boom here very soon. So we decided, let's see what the oat tasted like. So we did. We bought a ton of oat. We mashed it in. We fermented it out. We distilled it out. And it's one of our better selling products now. So we actually have 2 versions of it. So we have our straight off the still, cut with water, filtered, 100% oat. And then we do another one here that we actually do a really light aging in Canadian sugar maple just to give it a little different flavor.
Excellent. Oh, this one I have. I've already gone through 2 bottles of this. Yeah. I still have a little bit left on the shelf at home, and it's an excellent product.
It's good. Really is. We enjoy it.
It's 100% oats.
Yep.
And you use the alpha and amylase. And
alpha and beta. Amylase for the conversion.
Now, do you do any of it malted, or is it all just straight?
Straight, no malt. Yeah, no malt. Okay. Straight oats, no malted grains in there. So we use a different form of amylase enzyme and saccharifying enzyme.
Yeah. So it's an excellent taste. It's got, you can taste the oats pure front and center, and very heavy in the palate, but a wonderful finish when it's done.
We did a good job making our cups. That's for sure. So I'll move on here. So these are our vodkas. So we actually have 2 vodkas out, and this was the start of it. So this is a Dixon Silver Creek vodka, 100% corn recipe, distilled many times. In Ontario, you have to distill vodka out at 95% alcohol. So just depending on equipment, size, and diversity. In order for us to achieve that, we actually distill our vodka out 16 times. We have to get it to 95. And we also like a very clean, pure vodka. And something else that we actually pride ourselves on is the smoothness of our vodka. and we achieve that via carbon filtering. So we spend hours and hours and hours and hours carbon filtering, removing those impurities that cause that, what I call the burn, right? So this one is in the LCBO now. We're in about 150 stores now and growing. So then we also do another vodka, and it starts as our Dixon Silver Creek vodka, and we actually make this via, it's almost the same as a gin process, minus the juniper. But we do a vapor infusion with ghost pepper, Scotch bonnet, horseradish, celery seed, dill, and garlic. So we infuse those vapors via an additional distillation. And this one here has been a huge hit for us. It's definitely made for the Caesar drinkers of the world. It's a little tough to drink on its own.
Yes, this one's also on top of my fridge as well. My wife likes this one.
So this one actually, this will have a big summer for us. It just got a pretty big listing in the LCBO, so there's a bunch of it in the warehouse, and it'll be heading out to stores here in a couple of weeks. So super excited about that.
And Clamatos in Canada are famous.
Very, yes. Caesars are big. Caesars are big here for sure. And then we have our gin lineup. So we have, this was our first gin. This is our Wicked Citrus. This actually just won another World Award for Best Canadian Contemporary Gin for the second year in a row. So again, gin is vodka. It starts as our Silver Creek vodka. We do that additional distillation with our botanical recipe. This is a citrus forward gin. So this is one that we do. This is our Wicked Licorice Gin. So licorice forward. This one just won Best Canadian Old Tom Gin. And we're just in development right now, working on a chocolate gin.
Oh,
chocolate martinis, yeah.
I haven't seen that in the shelf.
Not yet. We're still playing around with that one.
And that's the greatest thing about a micro distillery, is that you provide flavors that aren't out there.
You can do whatever the heck you like.
Yep.
Sky's the limit. No, that is a nice thing about it. Obviously, you make these on smaller batches to start, and then just keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking until you finally get it. So I think we have one more distillation to go with the chocolate gin, and I think we've got it. Nice thing about this industry too, you're smaller. We support local and natural. We use natural stuff.
Well, I know that you purchase everything locally, which is great for the farmers in the area.
Locally, yep. Even when it comes down to peppers, if there's a farmer that has peppers, we have a coffee liqueur. We buy all of our coffee beans from Planet Bean here in Guelph. The honeycomb that we use, because again we use real ingredients. So in the chocolate gin, even the honeycomb that we buy, we bought it from the University of Guelph. So yeah, we try and support local where we can, where it makes sense to. So there's a couple more, and actually I don't have one on the counter. Here. So we're actually in the carbonated canned drink business as well.
Do you do this in-house, or
yes.
is this? Oh, excellent.
We don't can it here, but we essentially make the inside and then we send it out to be canned. So this was the one we had out last year. So we use we now call it the award-winning gin. So we use our Wicked Citrus Gin. So this is a ginger, cucumber, mint, lime. This was across Ontario last year, and did very, very well. It's actually been pulled from the LCBO, but in its place, this is this year's new one. So this is the Gin Fusion Lemon, and this will be across Ontario in about 2 weeks. It should be there. You can still get the ginger at this distillery, and we're going to resubmit it for submission next year as well. So, and we're working on 3 more flavors for next year too.
Well, that's an excellent. That makes a great sideline for your product.
It does, yeah, for sure. And then we do a few liqueurs, and this is just strictly in-house. Again, we play around. We used to have about 7 or 8 liqueurs that we did, but this was getting too big. We needed to make the bar longer, so we decided it's a little more easier to manage. We'll shrink it up a little bit. But these are our 3 staples. So actually on the counter back there, I was just bottling some coffee. So we do with coffee, anise, and a cinnamon liqueur. Yep. And again, all natural infusions. They start with our Dixon Silver Creek vodka. That's the base, and then we do the infusion, and there you go. We have a maple syrup as well. So we do a couple of local collaborations. So there's a syrup farmer just up the road who's a very, very busy guy right now because he's tapping trees, with Shady Grove Syrup Farm. So what we do is we take his syrup and we age it in one of our used barrels for 8-9 months, and we barrel age maple syrup.
Excellent.
And it's not on the counter because we are sold out, but we actually do a barbecue sauce as well. A real local chef here in town named Chef Scotty Yates runs a bistro food truck.
Yes.
He makes barbecue sauce, and we give him oat shine, and we mix it all together, and we put booze and everything. I think we have a problem with it. But
Well,
that's essentially us.
That's excellent. So, and a lot of these product lines I'm quite familiar with. The cinnamon gin,
Vodka. Yeah, vodka. Those are all vodka.
that's the coffee one, and
That's cinnamon.
That's the cinnamon.
Yeah.
These two I also have on my shelf,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed both those quite a bit. I don't think I've tried your maple. That'll be on my list next
It's
year.
on the list.
Or when you're doing a new batch. When do you?
We'll actually be barreling. We have some here, but we'll actually, now that he's tapping, and he's a very busy guy right now, he's already called me and said, hey, we got to get more into a barrel, so now's the time. So we'll probably get a couple more barrels going that'll launch closer to the end of the year. But
Yep, and this has been a great year for maple syrup.
very good. That's
It's been a
hence why
very
he
long
doesn't-
spring.
He hasn't had a lot of sleep. He's a cranky guy right now.
So 3 years, open doors, and how long did it take to learn the craft prior to this?
Well, I mean, going back 4 years ago and today is a little different. So if you go back 4 years ago and you wanted to learn how to distill, there's nowhere to do it in Canada. Essentially, there's some guys that offer some, 2 and 3 day courses. You're really not going to learn a whole lot. Niagara College now is now offering a Master Distiller's course.
They just started.
Just started. We actually helped a little bit with that. But prior to that, there was nothing. So we learned by doing. We took a couple of courses down south. There was a real good one actually in Kentucky called Moonshine University.
Yes.
So we went down there and did a little bit of learning. At the end of the day, you only retain so you're normally drinking the whole time you're down there, and you only can retain so much. So you come back here and you try to apply what you learned, and you do okay, and you learn from your mistakes. We actually had a gentleman reach out to us that had heard that we were starting a distillery. This gentleman's name is Mike Delavante. So 4 years ago, who's Mike Delavante? Just some old guy that just wants free booze, right? So, got into conversation with Mike, and turns out Mike was actually the master distiller at Appleton Rum for almost 40 years. So we quickly latched on to Mike, hired him on as a consultant. He's a dear, dear friend now. We speak to him weekly. He's actually coming up for a visit next week. But he was an integral part of my learning for sure. 4 years ago when we were starting up and playing with recipes and stuff, the 3 partners, so there's myself and then Jeremy and Vicky Dickson, we were still working our full-time jobs. So we would work all day, we would come here, we would start, mashing in, start the fermentation process, and eventually they would have to be distilled out. So we would be, all hours of the night, and then back to work the next day. And poor Mike, Mike's not a young man anymore. We would call him at all hours of the night. Say, Mike, we got a problem with the still. What's going on? And of course, he was here too sometimes as well.
And
so
you didn't have this still back then.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, you had this from the beginning.
Yeah, right from the beginning. Yeah. So go big or go home. Yeah, that's what we say, right? But yeah.
Well, that's a big outlay for something you weren't fully sure of right off the bat.
Yeah.
We talk to most people, and they start off with a nice small still. They start off with a little experimental. Now, do you use this for your experimental work as well?
No, we have a smaller little still that we'll do for, we do home cook. So even these recipes here, they don't start out as 2,000 liter runs, you know. Even a gin, starts out in a little mason jar as an infusion, and then you build on top of that. And the same with this stuff here. Our corn and rye, our Canadian whiskey recipe took many, many, many tries, and it started in a little 10 liter pail. So it all starts there, and then you just build and build and build. And even same with this industry too. This starts out as a 1 liter, and you eventually build that to a 10,000 liter run, and hopefully things don't change too much. And they always do.
So when you go to do your experimentation, you've got a huge still here, and you're going to do that on a smaller still. What do? You lock the door and bring the little one in here?
Yeah. We'll fire it up in here, and we'll do a small run, and we'll see how it turns out. And then from there, you just keep growing and growing and growing, and you build on it and build on it, and as you grow in recipe size, things do start to change, and so you're constantly tweaking until you kind of find that.
Right, but you're able to get your base recipe.
Yeah,
right?
you get what it's going to kind of be like, and if you like it, then you know that you're close.
Good. So, you started off, and you do have the small still that you started with. My question is, when we look at countries like New Zealand, which have legalized home distilling, and we look at all the negatives that we hear from people in the industry saying, home distilling will create this, will create that. There's so many risks with it. And yet when we look at New Zealand, and the exact reverse is what's happening in all categories. What do you think of home distilling in Canada? We have wine, we have beer at home distilling, or home brewing. So what do you think of home distilling in alcohol?
We know it goes on in many garages across Ontario. We're fully aware of that. And I don't think that's something that should ever change, to be honest with you. Those little home stills are not producing, it's personal alcohol.
Right.
It goes back for generations and generations. We have in Guelph here a contingent of a lot of Italians. So, Grappa.
Yep.
Yeah. We get asked all the time, are you going to make Grappa? I'm like, no way. So you can't do it as good as the 80-year-old grandfather in his garage making Grappa for his family for Christmas dinner.
But that would likely be the only product you can't beat on. Well, whenever I've tried and I've tasted others for home distilling, once again, you get into quality issues. I mean, home distilling's never going to replace this. It should never. I mean, the flavors, the equipment, the knowledge, it's just not there.
It's not there, and it's because it's not the proper equipment.
Right.
There's a fair bit of science behind distilling, and when moonshine, whatever you're making, is coming off the still, there's things in there that you don't want, and you have to have the ability to cut that out. I've had a lot of really bad home moonshines. Quite honestly, I haven't had a good one.
Yeah.
And it's because they're not clean.
Right.
They haven't been cut.
And, home distilling, it's improving. The quality is improving, and it will over time. But once again, I believe it will never match up to a full distillery's product.
I don't think so.
But it's like a homebrew beer. There is a market for that. Some people enjoy that, but they are people that still buy a quality
Got to start somewhere.
commercial beer. Yep.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere, right? So, yep.
Excellent. Chevy, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mark.
And we'll see you all again on the next episode of Still in Canada. Thank you.